Thank you, Eva. Thank you so much. Hopefully the discussion and the presentation will not be too limiting, as we had a really inspiring morning and we would really love to keep it that way. So let me share my screen and you should be able to see a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation. Do not be alarmed. It should be quite easy to follow and not too wordy. So first things first, who are we? We are the EAEA working group that I am currently representing. We're all coming from members of the EAEA. So we're Dafni Kek, we're CPI Romania, we're APCEP, we're Camara Municipal from Lisbon, ADB, the DIE German Institute, and Lernerraum Wien from VHS Wien. So what brought us together? Why did we work on digitalization? Well, first of all, of course, we got a call from the EAEA. But secondly, we all had a common interest in order to understand and more thoroughly discuss what it means to act within adult education and lifelong learning for digitalization and democracy. In the beginning, we also tackled concepts on the digital gap and digitalization on adult education organizations, mostly separately in smaller groups. But as Professor Figueiredo said this morning, separation doesn't lead to as many advantages that actually combining things has. So we discussed that and we agreed on combining everything. And we started working on our first action as a digitalization working group. So what we have already worked on, we have worked on a context paper that acted mainly as a way for us to research and understand more deeply the multiple levels of interrelation between democracy and digitalization, and of course their effect in adult education. But it was also a way for us to share our differences, our topics, and to share and to open a discussion. In the future, we aim to host some further publications on experiencing actual topics related to democracy and digitalization, to have opinions, to maintain our challenges, and to formulate our visions for the future. The main themes for today's context paper mainly are targeted around four main pillars. So the first one tackles democracy conceptualization in the premise of digitalization, digital politics, democracy and digitalization, the role of adult education, and of course, the policy recommendation that Uwe has already mentioned. Starting off with our concept, we really wanted to get into the power dynamics. Previously, Mr. Alek Tarkowski, I think, mentioned how power dynamics and the defense on the use of data and the use of what we call open information is crucial in order to understand what's the role of education in this duality. So first of all, we formulated four main areas of power conditions and dynamics, that being power dynamics between participants in online communities and society inside and outside of the communities, researchers and the research, so us previewing these people and their power dynamics, power in relation to outreach, and of course amongst participants in online communities themselves. We tried to pinpoint as many and interrelate as many topics as possible without being too, how could I say, too complex. So make things real while maintaining an interest in what really matters for the adult educators and for us as researchers as well. So we tackle concepts of codifications as mentioned by Freire, the representation and why is that crucial in online space as much as in the public sphere of the physical space, intersectionality, especially growing with the newer generations and how important it is to not stick to one topic and one field specifically. That also comes back to the initial keynote speech of this morning, and how these concepts, these theoretical concepts of both education and social living are interlinked to distribution, intervention, security in education, and of course, the interest of the people working inside and learning inside the digital community. Maintaining that, we really wanted to get through public space, digitalization, and democracy, and how these topics are interrelated. That's public sphere is a key concept that came up in the panel discussion again, just as a reminder, because it's a concept of publicity, it's a concept of public space that really involves the topic of the gaze, and gaze is a really crucial point when we talk about digitalization. So digital access in both shaping information and creating content, but also in the use that it has through the political lens, the absolute and directly political lens, through the politicians and politics investing through their online presence, has actually extended the traditional sides of democracy assemblies and the notion of public space into our own minds. Currently, a democratic assembly can be hosted on Facebook, can be hosted in multiple platforms, whereas still we need to see where dialogue fits inside of it, as we mentioned this morning. So we ask in this paper, and we want to foster a discussion on how does digital power and this particular shift has created actual digital public spaces. Do we have actual digital public spaces? Yes, no, and why? What kind of dynamics are created and maintained therein, and how democratic citizens are embodied, occupy the space that they create or has been created, struggle for access to physical resources, and perform democracy on physical stages at least as much as they engage with ideas in the virtual space. It was crucial when talking about public space and the relation between society and the digital society, to see which groups are digitally excluded, because if we do not realize who has been excluded, we cannot talk about inclusion holistically. So first of all, we have three areas of exclusion. So we talk about access, physical and financial communicational access. So that means bandwidth, computers, microphones, anything infrastructural that's really technical, but it is actually quite political and a main case in constructing an equal environment. Secondly, we have motivation. A lot of groups based on age, gender, and racial and linguistic backgrounds may be demotivated to take part in online communities. A lot of the time, the digital communities come from people with privileged timelines, as was mentioned before in the panel discussion. So we really need to approach that as well. And finally, we talk about skills, knowledge, and behaviors, including available means of learning ICT skills or practice, fears of fraud and online security. So who is actually using these open spaces? How do we formulate our defenses? So these three topics of access really are reflected through the digital divide on an ever-increasing polarization of society at large. So we have the accessibility gap, and we have the user gap in this ever-increasing polarization. So we have people that do not have the means to access, and we have people that do not wish to access the digital sphere. So what's the promise that we can make for adult learners? We can promise, or we have to promise, in a sense, that we have to significantly increase the supply and demand for high quality provision, have to ensure effective outreach, guidance, and motivation strategies. And then we really have to enhance the quality of adult learning, leading to skills, knowledge, and behavioral attitudes that really add to the discussion. It was really important also, like, getting to the following parts of the research, but also constructing a field for our opinions and following papers to discuss about data politics, because data is like a really key concept in digitalization and democracy, both in terms of who has access to data, who can manipulate the data, and who can actually use the data for which benefits. That really aligns with the example of the panel discussion on the use of the Flickr images for multiple purposes and the design of AI with face recognition that Mr. Tarkovsky mentioned. So data politics actually refers to determining the way how the internet as an ecosystem and as a whole is developing. So in order to have and to build a holistic perspective of education on the internet as a global system, we have two again polars, seeing the internet as a diverse space with few big platforms, many small actors, and even more very small and diverse participants. Here it's really important to see the work that we do working with European projects, how we create smaller fora, smaller platforms, and we foster in our localities and internationalities discussions, versus this overemphasization and advertisement of the role of the large global states and the capital-driven mega platforms, the meta platform, as a lot of you may have heard, and how that interferes and acts on the very questionable practices in regards of rights and personal data. So in those terms, we perceive that education needs to understand and recognize the systemic importance of a vivid internet ecosystem for competition, but also for democracy, because we perceive the internet as a place that is strongly shaped by the principles of non-centrality, diversity, and openness. Through this access that we have mentioned in shaping information and creating content from everybody and for everybody. The role of ALE organizations in digital democracy was also a particularly interesting topic when we were formulating the paper that is not yet completely done, but we hope that it will be soon, and especially with the feedback that we will gather after the discussions today. But the role of adult education and adult learning organizations was crucial. And so the main two questions are: what are the underlying values and beliefs embedded in our digital lifestyle as organizations, and how can adult education identify and address digital citizenship issues, and how do we empower disenfranchised people towards full digital citizenship? So in this effect, ALE is working towards democratizing the digital gap that we have already mentioned, and that's how we can say bridging of this gap has to work closely with multiple and critical literacies, adaptations in terms of how we have and how we do and how we are adult education, create connections between both the organization, the participants, but the society at large as well, and also what it means for us to have effective participation and engagement of everybody involved in adult education. All of these micro chapters that we will try to enforce, and we're trying to enforce better in the context paper, which you have hopefully received in your emails previously to this conference, was to get into some recommendations, because a lot of times it's really good to theorize, but what do we actually recommend? The recommendations are going to be presented more thoroughly tomorrow, that we will have also a really nicely made infographic that's really accessible and hopefully really useful, but just as an annotation of what we discussed about the key recommendations for both policymakers, but also organizations as well, and society at large, is to recognize and support the role of adult learning and education, promote confident and critical use of digital education, enforce data transparency, promote digital citizenship, support adult education, fund and support learning and education in communities, create synergies, bridge the accessibility gap, and promote in-service training through the perspective that technology serves learning and education, empowers learners and educators, not bureaucratic-based controlled centralized systems. Before getting into like closing this presentation and getting to the interesting stuff that's actually discussing on the topics, it's really important to see the words that we see and we perceive in the recommendation. So it's recognition, promotion, enforcing, and support. We see these things coming up again and again and again. And this topic of support is, as mentioned before, is linked directly with peer support. And that's something that we see again. We have to perceive ourselves, even if not as peers in the dynamic of education, we are peers in constructing this digital community and this digital society. And that's a key outtake that we had.